Now, in the presence of a threat or a potential loss, our bodies go into a protective mode, a defensive mode. And that mode is what I call threat lockdown. We're facing a threat, and our body is amping itself up
Absolutely.
to deal with it. Okay? Now, back in the olden days,
Yes.
talking about caveman syndrome, this is something we've had with us for a long, long time. And the reason we have it is, something goes bump in the night. And your body starts preparing itself to do one of three things, typically.
Okay.
Fight, flee,
Right.
or freeze. And what we decide to do, or what we end up doing, is largely determined by our brain's mental simulation of what is the threat, and how likely are we to prevail against the threat. Okay? So
Totally.
if your brain thinks that you can go womp on something and you're going to win, like you're going to get rid of the threat that way, you'll fight.
Yeah.
If you don't believe, or the simulation is you have zero chance of winning, in the sense of fighting, but you could win by running away, you could get away from the threat, then you'll run.
Yeah.
If your brain simulates that you can't win by fighting or by running away, it's like a no-win situation, your best bet is to freeze
Yikes.
and to hope the threat doesn't notice you. Seriously.
This sounds like a bad plan.
Well, and sometimes, think about like a rabbit, like out in the wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It can't.
If you have camouflage, it might work.
You can't, like a rabbit can't fight a coyote.
Right.
It will not win. Sometimes it can run away if there's shelter nearby.
Right.
So it'll sometimes do that. But if there's no shelter nearby and the rabbit can't fight, it will just crouch, hoping that the coyote doesn't find it. Okay, It's a very basic physiological thing. Poor bunny. And hopefully freezing will, the coyote will just pass.
Not smell it.
And not smell it, and it'll be fine. Okay, so that's where this stuff comes from. Okay, now our body, when we're seeing some type of threat,
Right.
we go into lockdown. Okay, which is this defensive mode. Okay, and physiologically, our body is amping itself up to do one of these three things. Okay, now the threats that we faced 100,000 years ago are very different than the threats we face now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tiger is coming towards you.
Right.
Okay, you're gonna fight, you're gonna flee, maybe you'll freeze, whatever.
And then it's over.
Exactly. So the threats back then were very acute in that they could kill you. It's bad. The threats were very acute, but they were typically over very quickly.
Yeah.
A couple minutes maximum. And, either you beat the tiger, you run away from the tiger doesn't notice you, or you get eaten. Like, that's
right.
Basically the options. Now, we don't deal with tigers and predators and all of those wonderful things on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The threats that we're facing now tend to be less acute. They probably won't kill you, but they're chronic in that they last a long time.
Which we don't deal with very well physiologically.
No, we don't at all. So having a bad boss that threatens to fire you every day and is emotionally abusive, okay? Or not making enough money to cover your mortgage, or, having relationship issues, or all of these things, our body prepares in the same way. We're producing adrenaline and cortisol and all of these hormones to get us ready to fight, flee, or freeze. But you can't really fight your boss physically. At least it's not a good idea. Running away from a mortgage from creditors
different problems
doesn't solve the problem. So typically the only thing in a modern context that our brain knows how to do is freeze. Hope it doesn't notice us. Hope the bank does not notice that we're behind on our mortgage and that this is a bad thing.
Oh no.
Okay? So this is the reason why I call it threat lockdown.
Yeah.
Is because typically when we're facing a threat like this, the response is for us to freeze. And as long as we stay frozen,
Yeah.
we can't do the things that may actually help us to get
sense.
out of it. Perfect example. If you're in a job you hate and you have business ideas, one of your best options may be to start a business that gives you an income so you no longer have to rely on your old job and you
Right.
can jettison your crappy boss.
Right.
Okay? Sounds rational. When you're in the midst of threat lockdown, that is the furthest thing from your mind.
Right.
Because you're feeling so under siege, so like, this is a horrible situation that all your brain knows how to do, and this is where our legacy brain really comes to bite us. We just freeze. And, similarly in the sense of, if a tiger is prowling and you're freezing hoping it won't notice, it doesn't make sense for you to, start staring at how pretty the clouds are today.
Right. Right.
That doesn't serve us. So we're tuned to stay focused on the threat as long as the threat exists. But that also means that you're going to have a really hard time looking for things that may help you solve the issue
Right.
while the threat's still there.
Right. And this is why we have like chronic physical pains now. This is why people have so many digestive problems, because our body systems don't work very well when we are in this like constant
At all.
stressful situation.
They really don't.
Really.
We're not built for this.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things that you can do
Okay.
to help, because as long as you're feeling in this threat lockdown state, you really can't do anything. That's the problem. Okay, so the question is, how do you get yourself out of lockdown
Yeah.
and into a more productive mode?
Okay.
Okay, and you can either eliminate the threat,
Okay.
okay, which is usually due to a structural change,
Like quitting your job.
like quitting your job,
Okay.
okay, or you could recognize, and this is an example of reframing or setting a different reference level. You
Okay.
can actually realize that what you think is a threat is not actually a threat. Because remember, from a biological standpoint,
Right.
we're treating these things
Right.
as life or death issues.
Oh.
So if
okay.
you're able to,
like think yourself out of it?
yes,
Okay.
and this is something we'll talk about in the next week in terms of what's sometimes called worst case scenario. I like to call it the doomsday scenario. It's more evocative. If you can actually simulate through the different things that could happen, and this is scenario planning too,
Right. Okay.
and the end result in any one of these things is not you or your loved ones dying.
That's true, because that's what the old threats were.
That's what
So
the old
that's how
threats were.
scared we are.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
So if you can actually get to the point where you recognize that, yes, this job is horrible. Yes, there is the threat that my boss fires me. What would I do about that? Is there a way to improve upon that?
Right.
It's a good way to get yourself out of lockdown, because
True.
you can convince yourself, because remember, we're not talking to the rational part of our brains here.
Exactly.
It's the survival and the emotional parts of our brains that are really scared. And so we're trying to talk ourselves down from that. And if you can simulate out, in perceptual form, which is what those parts of our brain respond to, it's not just saying, telling yourself, oh, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
Your brain, those parts of your brain have no idea what to do with that.
Right.
But if you can actually imagine what would happen if these eventualities come to pass, and what would you do, and will you be okay? Then you can start to see that, the tiger that you thought was there actually never existed in the first place. You were scared of a ghost. You were scared of something. You made an interpretation, or there's a different way of looking at the situation
Okay.
that's not as scary.
Cool.
And if you can do that, you can get yourself out of threat lockdown.